They weren't just the kind of kids who drove nannies away. They made history for it. 17 professionals had stepped into the Whitaker mansion certain they could handle 3 spirited boys. By sundown, every single one had fled, swearing they'd never come back. But then came a woman no one expected. Someone the world had already underestimated 100 times before. And by the end of her first day, she wouldn't just change the boys' lives. She'd change everything. They didn't just scare away nannies. They destroyed them. 17 women had walked into the Whitaker mansion, each thinking they could handle 3 spirited boys. By sunset, all 17 had run out in tears, clutching their handbags like life rafts. Belinda Johnson had read the rumors. She'd seen the photos of smash picture frames and heard the whispers about the triplets from hell. But nothing could have prepared her for the moment she stepped across that marble threshold and froze. The grand living room, once the pride of one of the wealthiest families in the city, looked like a crime scene staged by children. A rainbow of paint streaked the cream walls, couch cushions were gutted like hunted prey, and feathers floated lazily through the air. 3 identical 6-year-old boys stood at the center of the chaos. They weren't laughing. They weren't even grinning. They looked angry, hurt, like little soldiers who'd been fighting a war no one else could see. "You can't make us like you," shouted the tallest. Later, Belinda would learn his name was Tommy as he hurled a wooden truck toward her feet. "We don't want another nanny," chimed the other 2, Danny and Bobby, like backup singers in a very dark song. "We want our mama." Most people would have backed away, shut the door, and let the agency find someone else to sacrifice. But Belinda didn't move. She didn't see demons. She saw 3 kids gasping for air under the weight of a grief too big for their small bodies. "I'm not here to replace her," Belinda said, her voice even and soft, stepping over the debris. "I'm here because I know what it feels like when your whole world breaks apart." The words hung in the air like they'd sucked all the sound out of the room. Tommy's brow furrowed. No adult had ever answered them like that. "You don't know anything about us," he said, narrowing his eyes. "You're right," Belinda admitted, crouching so she was eye level with the 3 of them. "I don't know everything yet, but I know fear when I see it. I know anger when I see it. And I know when kids are trying to push someone away before they can be left again." The triplets glanced at each other, unsure what to do with this strange woman, who didn't yell, didn't bribe, didn't threaten. "And here's the thing," Belinda continued with the faintest smile. "I'm not going anywhere. By the end of today, I'm going to prove it." Before they could answer, heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. Danny's shoulders stiffened. "Daddy's coming. He's going to be mad." Belinda didn't have a turn to know it was John Whitaker, their father, a billionaire who looked like he'd stepped straight out of a Wall Street magazine spread, but with exhaustion clinging to him like a second suit. 6 months earlier, John had been on top of the world. A self-made empire worth over $2 billion, a glass office overlooking the skyline, and a wife he adored. Then a rainy Tuesday had taken Sarah Whitaker's life in a car accident, and the world stopped making sense. The triplets hadn't just lost their mother. They'd lost the glue that held the family together. And John, well, he buried himself in work. It was easier than coming home to 3 pairs of accusing blue eyes that seemed to say, "You should have kept her safe." 17 nannies had tried. 17 had failed. The agency had stopped sending candidates entirely. The Whitakers' reputation had spread like wildfire, turning away even the boldest child care professionals. Until Belinda. She hadn't planned on applying. She'd been scrolling through job listings in her small, rain-damp apartment. 2 months unemployed after the last family she worked for moved overseas. The Whitaker posting looked like a disaster wrapped in a paycheck, double the usual salary, and a line that read, "Previous nannies have found the position challenging." To Belinda, that translated perfectly. "We're desperate, and the kids are hurting." She understood hurt. At 7 years old, she'd lost both parents in a house fire and been shuffled through foster homes like luggage no one wanted to carry. By 18, she'd learned 2 things. The kids who acted out the worst were often the ones aching the most. And healing didn't come from rules alone. It came from trust. So she'd written a different kind of application. Less about her work history, more about her heart. When John opened the door to meet her, He was ready to be disappointed again. She wasn't what he expected. No wide-eyed awe at the mansion. No stiff posture screaming, "I can whip your kids into shape." She looked steady, like she'd been through storms and had learned how to stand in the rain without flinching. They sat in his home office while the triplets were at school. "I'll be honest," Belinda said. "I don't have degrees or fancy certificates. What I do have is 8 years of experience with children and a childhood that taught me how it feels to lose everything." John leaned back, studying her. "Why would you want this job?" "You've read the stories." "Because they're not bad kids," Belinda replied without hesitation. "They're grieving, and grief in kids often wears the mask of defiance." Something shifted in his eyes. For months, every candidate had talked about discipline and boundaries, as if his sons were puzzles to solve. This woman spoke like they were people to be understood. Still, he warned her, "They've driven away every nanny in less than a week." She smiled faintly. "I've worked with kids who broke every plate in the house just to feel in control of something. I'm not afraid of mess, Mr. Whitaker. I'm afraid of giving up on children who need someone to stay." By the next morning, she was standing in the Whitaker foyer at 7 a.m., thermos of coffee in one hand and a bag of homemade cookies in the other. When the triplets came barreling into the kitchen at 7:30, it was mid-chaos. Sticky syrup puddles, overturned chairs, and Bobby poised on the counter like a pirate about to dump orange juice over his brothers' heads. Most adults would have gone straight to shouting. Belinda laughed. "Wow," she said, stepping right into the mess. "You guys are really good at this. I'm impressed." 3 pairs of confused eyes turned toward her. "You're not going to yell?" Danny asked. "Why would I yell? Looks like you had fun." "Probably not as fun as cookies, though." She set the bag on the table casually, as if sticky floors were an everyday occurrence. Bobby added suspiciously, "We don't like nannies." "That's fine," Belinda said cheerfully. "I'm not a nanny. I'm just a friend who tells amazing stories." For the first time, Tommy's glare faltered. And that was the moment, the first tiny crack in the walls they'd built around their hearts. For a long, heavy moment, no one moved. The triplets stood there, their socks sticking to the syrup-slick floor, staring at Belinda like she was speaking a language no adult had ever used with them before. Tommy finally broke the silence. "What kind of stories?" His voice was still guarded, but curiosity had cracked through. "Stories about kids who think they're alone," Belinda said, leaning against the counter, "and find out they're not. Stories where the ones everyone underestimates turn out to be the heroes." Danny wrinkled his nose. "That's just make-believe." Belinda gave a small shrug. "Maybe, or maybe those stories are truer than they sound." She crouched down so her eyes were level with theirs. "Here's the deal. You don't have to like me. You don't have to trust me. But I'll be here tomorrow and the day after and the day after that, no matter what kind of mess you make." Tommy opened his mouth to respond, but the sound of footsteps approached. John Whitaker appeared in the doorway. Sleeves rolled up, the faint lines of exhaustion deepened by what was clearly another sleepless night. "How's it going in here?" he asked, his voice cautious. Belinda stood, giving him a brief smile. "We were just negotiating a peace treaty." John's brow arched. "That's more progress than anyone's made in months." Belinda turned back to the boys. "So, gentlemen, what's the first thing on the agenda for this peace treaty?" Bobby's hand shot up. "Cookies." Danny smirked. "After we clean up." Tommy's eyes darted between his brothers and Belinda, as if trying to decide whether joining them would be surrendering. "Fine," he muttered, "but I'm not saying I like you." Belinda grinned. "Good. I don't want you to like me yet. That's too easy. I want you to decide if I've earned it." They cleaned together, a task that should have been a disaster, but somehow turned into laughter. Belinda didn't order them around. She gave them little jobs like feather patrol and juice captain, and when Tommy intentionally spilled a bit more syrup, she handed him a sponge without a word. He looked almost disappointed that she didn't scold him. By the time the counters were wiped and the sticky floor mopped, the boys were perched at the table with chocolate chip cookies in hand. John watched from the doorway, his arms crossed, a flicker of something almost like relief passing through his eyes. In the months since Sarah's death, his home had felt more like a battlefield than a place of comfort. Every evening was an argument, every morning a standoff. But here, just 2 hours into Belinda's first day, there was a truce, and then his phone buzzed. He glanced at the caller ID and felt his stomach knot. It was Marcus, his attorney. John stepped into the hallway to answer. "What's going on?" Marcus didn't waste time. "Local news is running a segment tonight. Someone leaked details about the nannies quitting. They've got interviews, John. 3 former employees calling your kids dangerous." The headline practically writes itself. John's throat tightened. "And Belinda? They know you just hired someone new. They'll probably paint her as your latest casualty." When he hung up, he stayed there for a moment, leaning against the wall, trying to will away the pounding in his temples. The boys were finally laughing again. If Belinda got scared off by the media, the fragile thread holding this morning together would snap. He walked back into the kitchen, ready to explain, but the sight stopped him. The triplets were on the floor with Belinda, building a sprawling block fortress. "It's for Mama," Bobby was saying, stacking a tower with careful precision, "so she can see we're making something nice for her." John felt the air leave his lungs. They hadn't spoken about their mother like that in months. Without anger, without tears that turned into shouting. Tommy looked up. "Daddy, is Belinda staying?" John hesitated, caught between wanting to protect her from the storm headed their way and the truth. "Why don't you keep building?" Belinda said gently, "and let me talk to your dad for a minute." They stepped into the living room, the sounds of Bobby's laughter trailing behind them. "Belinda," John began, "there's something you need to know. The media is going to run a piece tonight. It won't be kind to my boys or to you. If you want to walk away, I'd understand." She listened without interrupting, her expression steady. "Do you believe your sons are monsters?" "Of course not," he said, surprised by the question. "Then why does it matter what strangers say?" "Because it will affect them. School, friends, their future." Belinda shook her head. "What matters is what they learn from this moment. If I leave the first time things get hard, what am I teaching them? That they aren't worth standing by? No, they've had enough people walk away." John studied her, something unspoken passing between them. "So you're staying?" "I'm staying," she said simply. "But on one condition. When the story airs tonight, we watch it together. All of us. And we talk about it." The rest of the day moved in a way John wasn't used to. It was calm, not perfect. Danny had a small meltdown when he couldn't find a toy. Tommy accidentally knocked over a jar of paint. But Belinda never lost her composure. She didn't try to suppress their feelings. She met them head on, sometimes with humor, sometimes with quiet presence. By late afternoon, the boys were trailing her from room to room, helping set the table, handing her utensils while she cooked. John caught himself thinking how strange it was to hear their laughter filling the halls again. Over dinner, Bobby asked, "Belinda, will you tell us a story tonight?" "Sure," she said. "What kind?" Danny answered for all of them. "One where the people who think you're nothing find out they were wrong." Belinda smiled. "I think I know the perfect one." At 8 o'clock sharp, the Whitaker family sat in the living room. The boys curled against their father and Belinda. The segment began. Photos of the triplets splashed on the screen, words like unmanageable and problem children scrolling underneath. Former nannies' voices filled the room, each one describing the boys as wild, broken, impossible. Bobby's brow furrowed. "Why are they saying that about us?" Before John could speak, Belinda did. "Because they don't see you the way I do. I see 3 boys who've been fighting hard to protect themselves from being hurt again. That's not bad. That's brave." On the TV, another nanny's words cut deep. "These children may never be normal." Tommy's eyes filled. "Are we broken?" Belinda gathered them closer. "No, you're grieving. And grief isn't something that makes you less. It's proof that you love someone deeply." John felt the tension in his chest loosen. For the first time, someone wasn't trying to fix his boys. She was teaching them they didn't need fixing. And though he didn't know what tomorrow would bring, he knew one thing for certain. Belinda was not like the others. She was staying. Morning came soft and gray, the kind of light that made the Whitaker estate look like it was still half asleep. Normally, mornings here meant shouting matches over breakfast, someone refusing to get dressed for school, and John pacing the hallway with his tie half knotted. But on Belinda's second day, the house had a different rhythm. She was already in the kitchen by 6, sleeves rolled up, setting out bowls of pancake batter and arranging blueberries into little glass dishes. The triplets shuffled in one by one. Bobby first, rubbing his eyes, then Danny, and finally Tommy, who paused in the doorway like he was trying to decide whether to commit to this experiment of peace. "Morning, gentlemen," Belinda said, her voice warm but unhurried. "Today, we're making breakfast together." Tommy narrowed his eyes. "Is this one of those teamwork things?" Belinda smiled. "Nope. This is one of those we're gonna make a mess and eat it afterward things." That got a twitch of a smile from Danny. She handed Tommy a whisk, Bobby the blueberries, and Danny the measuring cups. No one was ordered to hurry. No one was corrected for spilling. When Bobby accidentally dropped half the blueberries on the floor, Belinda simply handed him a dustpan. "These guys had a good life," she joked. "Let's give them a respectful send-off to the trash." By the time John came downstairs, still fastening his watch, the boys were seated at the counter, flipping pancakes like seasoned short-order cooks. It stopped him in his tracks. "You made breakfast?" he asked, genuine surprise in his voice. "They did," Belinda said, sliding a plate toward him. "I was just the assistant." It wasn't just pancakes. It was a scene he hadn't thought possible anymore. His sons working together, joking without turning it into an argument. He didn't say anything, but he sat with them and ate every bite. After breakfast, Belinda suggested a walk to the garden behind the house before school. Normally, the boys resisted any activity that didn't involve screens or chaos, but she mentioned a secret mission, and that was enough to hook them. The mission turned out to be finding the most perfect leaf to mail to their grandmother in Vermont. "She's never been here," Belinda explained as they strolled through the dewy grass. "So we're going to send her a piece of your world." The boys fanned out, each taking their search seriously. Tommy found a deep red one shaped like a star. Danny chose a gold leaf with tiny speckles. Bobby brought back one that was half green, half brown. "It's like it's changing, but not all the way yet," he said. Holding it up, Belinda crouched beside him. "That's a good one. Kind of like how we change a little at a time, not all at once." John, watching from a distance, felt something shift. These were the same children who, just days ago, treated every adult like an intruder. Now they were listening, engaging. The school drop-off was where the first crack of reality slipped back in. As they approached the entrance, John noticed the stairs. A couple of parents whispered, their eyes flicking toward the triplets. He knew why. Last night's news segment had been shared all over social media. Danny picked up on it too. "Why are they looking at us?" he asked quietly. Belinda didn't sugarcoat it. "Because they think they know you from something they saw on TV. But remember, what strangers think doesn't tell the truth about who you are." Tommy frowned. "Then how do they find out the truth?" Belinda glanced at John, then back at the boys. "By watching you prove them wrong, little by little, just by being yourselves." While the boys were at school, John and Belinda met in his home office. She brought her own notebook, pages filled with neat handwriting. "This is what I'd like to try," she said, sliding across the desk. He glanced through, ideas for daily routines, ways to address meltdowns without escalating them, even suggestions for involving the boys in small household responsibilities. There was a section labeled connection before correction. "I want them to feel safe before we expect them to change their behavior," Belinda explained. "That doesn't mean no rules. It means they need to trust the person enforcing them." John nodded slowly. "You sound like you've done this before." "I've lived it before," she said simply. The real test came that afternoon. The school called. Tommy had gotten into an argument with another boy who called them the troubled triplets. In the past, this would have ended with John losing his temper and Tommy shutting down completely. But when they got home, Belinda didn't lecture. She sat with Tommy at the dining table, a sketch pad between them. "Draw it," she said. "What?" "What it felt like. Don't tell me, show me." Tommy hesitated, then began sketching in quick, jagged strokes. A small figure surrounded by bigger ones, all pointing. His hand moved faster, darker. When he finished, he shoved the pad toward her. Belinda studied it. Looks like you felt trapped. Tommy's eyes widened just slightly. Yeah. Want to know a secret? She asked. When I was your age, I felt that way almost every day. But I learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to fight back. It's to show them they can't decide who you are. For a long moment, he didn't respond. But when Danny and Bobby came barreling in, Tommy didn't push the sketch away. He left it on the table where they could see it. That evening, as the sun slipped low and turned the garden gold, the boys dragged John outside to show him a surprise. They built a fort out of blankets and lawn chairs, complete with a "No Dads Allowed" sign crossed out and rewritten as "Dad's Welcome." Belinda was inside with them, reading aloud from a book about a ship lost at sea and the crew that learned to survive by trusting each other. When she looked up and saw John standing there, she smiled, just a small, knowing smile, but it landed with the weight of something he hadn't felt in months. It wasn't just that his sons were calmer. They were lighter. And maybe, for the first time, so was he. Later that night, after the boys were in bed, John found Belinda in the kitchen, rinsing mugs. "I don't know how you're doing it," he said, leaning against the counter, "but the house feels different." She dried her hands. "It's not magic, John. It's consistency. They've had too many people walk out. They're just testing to see if I'll do the same." He nodded, quiet for a moment. "I need to warn you. Child Protective Services called this morning. They're scheduling a home visit. People have been filing complaints since the news segment." Belinda didn't flinch. "Then we'll let them see the truth. Invite them to stay the whole day, not just an hour. Let them watch the boys the way I do." John searched her face for hesitation. There was none. "All right," he said finally. "We'll do it your way." In that moment, he realized something. Belinda wasn't just holding the boys together. She was holding all of them together. The morning of the visit arrived with the kind of clear, sharp sunlight that makes every shadow look darker. John was up before dawn, pacing the kitchen like he was preparing for a courtroom battle. He'd handled billion-dollar mergers without breaking a sweat, but the idea of a stranger walking through his home, making notes about his children, made his chest feel tight. Belinda, on the other hand, moved with calm precision. She'd already set the dining table for breakfast, oatmeal with fruit, toast, and a plate of still warm muffins. The smell filled the house, coaxing the boys out of bed earlier than usual. "Big day today," Belinda said as they shuffled in, their hair tousled, eyes still heavy. Tommy frowned. "Is this about that lady coming to see if we're bad?" Belinda crouched so she could meet his eyes. "It's about a lady coming to see what life is really like here. And we're going to show her the truth, what it's like when you're being yourselves." Danny crossed his arms. "What if she doesn't believe us?" "Then we keep living our truth anyway." Belinda said simply, "We don't need her permission to be a family." At exactly 9, the doorbell rang. John opened it to find a woman in her early 50s, dressed in a neat navy blazer, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, offering her hand. "I'm Mrs. Rodriguez from Child Protective Services. Thank you for agreeing to a full-day observation. Please come in," John said, his voice formal but polite. Belinda appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Good morning, Mrs. Rodriguez. The boys are excited to show you what we've been up to." The social worker's brows lifted slightly, as if she wasn't used to being greeted that way. The boys were in the kitchen, aprons on, busy mixing cookie dough. "These are for the people who work in Daddy's office," Bobby announced proudly. "Belinda says when people work hard, they deserve something sweet." Mrs. Rodriguez watched quietly as Tommy measured flour without spilling a grain. Danny stirred the batter while humming, and Bobby counted out chocolate chips. She made a note on her clipboard, but her expression didn't give anything away. The morning unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance, though nothing about it felt staged. Belinda guided the boys through a mix of activities, tidying their rooms, doing a short reading session, and then heading out to the garden to water plants. At one point, Danny got frustrated when the watering can was too heavy. In the past, this might have ended in shouting or a full-on meltdown. But Belinda simply said, "Want to trade jobs? I'll carry the can and you can check the soil." The tension dissolved instantly. Mrs. Rodriguez followed, jotting notes as she observed the easy rhythm between Belinda and the boys. After lunch, they settled into what Belinda called quiet hour. The boys chose different activities. Bobby curled up with a picture book, Danny worked on a puzzle, and Tommy started drawing in his sketch pad. Mrs. Rodriguez sat across from John in the living room. "I've read the reports," she said. "They paint a very different picture from what I'm seeing today." John exhaled slowly. "We've had a rough year. Losing their mother, it shattered all of us. The boys didn't know how to express their grief, and I didn't know how to help them." Then Belinda came along. Mrs. Rodriguez glanced toward the boys. "And what makes her different?" John didn't hesitate. "She doesn't try to fix them. She tries to understand them." By mid-afternoon, Mrs. Rodriguez asked to spend some one-on-one time with the boys. Belinda nodded, stepping back but staying within sight. They went to the backyard, where the triplets showed her the fort they'd built. "It's our headquarters," Tommy explained. "We make plans here." "What kind of plans?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked, crouching down to their level. "Plans for nice stuff," Bobby said, "like surprising Daddy or making things for people." Danny chimed in, "And plans when people think we're trouble, so we can prove them wrong." Mrs. Rodriguez's pen stilled for a moment before she scribbled something down. The visit ended just before dinner. Mrs. Rodriguez stood in the foyer, her clipboard closed. "Mr. Whitaker, I'll be writing my report tonight. But I can tell you now, I've rarely seen children work so hard to rebuild trust, or adults so committed to helping them do it. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." Relief washed over John so powerfully that he had to steady himself against the doorframe. "Thank you," he said quietly. As she left, Belinda came up beside him, her eyes soft but knowing. "You did it," she said. He shook his head. "No, we did it." That evening, after the boys were in bed, John found Belinda in the garden. The air was cool, scented with jasmine, the kind of night that makes you feel like you could talk for hours. "Today could have gone very differently," he said. If she'd walked in 6 months ago, she would have seen chaos. Belinda glanced toward the house. "They were always good kids, John. They just needed someone to stay long enough for them to believe it." He didn't respond right away. He just looked at her, realizing that for the first time since Sarah's death, the house didn't feel like a place he was escaping from. It felt like home again. But outside the gates of the Whitaker estate, the media storm wasn't over. That night, a new headline began circulating. From demon triplets to family redemption? Some called it a PR stunt. Others demanded to know why a billionaire's parenting was national news. John read the comments late into the night, his jaw tight. He knew the boys might see them eventually, and when they did, he wanted Belinda there, because if she could teach them to stand tall through this, they'd carry that strength for the rest of their lives. The next morning, before the boys woke up, he knocked gently on her door. "Belinda," he said, "I think it's time we told them everything. Not just about the news, about us, about why you're really here." Her eyes searched his. "You're sure they're ready?" "I think they're more ready than I am," he admitted. And somewhere deep down, he knew this conversation would be the turning point, one that could either solidify the fragile trust they'd built or shatter it. The rain had started just before dawn, a steady whisper against the windows that made the Whitaker mansion feel like it was wrapped in glass. John stood in the hallway outside the boys' rooms, listening to the muffled sound of Belinda's voice drifting from behind Bobby's door. She was telling him a story, something about a tree that kept growing even when the storms bent its branches. It was a perfect metaphor for what he wanted to talk about. The problem was, he didn't know if he could get the words out without breaking the fragile balance they'd found. When breakfast was over, John asked the boys to meet him in the living room. Belinda stayed near the back of the room, leaning against the arm of the sofa, her calm presence steadying him. "I need to tell you something important," John began, looking from one small face to the next. "You've been hearing a lot of things about us lately. From the news, from other kids at school, And I want you to hear the truth from me, not from strangers. Tommy's eyes narrowed slightly. Is this about them calling us trouble? John nodded. Yes, but it's also about why Belinda is here. Bobby's small hand tightened around the edge of his shirt. She's here because no one else would take the job, he said softly, almost like he was bracing himself for confirmation. That's not true, Belinda said before John could respond. She moved closer, crouching so she was level with them. I'm here because I saw a family that needed someone to fight for them, and I decided I was going to be that person. Danny tilted his head. Why us? Belinda hesitated, then glanced at John, who gave a small nod. Because I know what it's like to feel like everyone leaves, she said. When I was your age, I lost my parents. I lived in different houses with people I didn't know. Sometimes they were kind, sometimes they weren't. But the worst part was always wondering how long I'd be allowed to stay. The boys were quiet now, watching her. Even Tommy, whose usual default was skepticism, didn't look away. That's why, she continued. When I read about you three, I didn't see trouble. I saw kids who needed someone to prove they weren't going anywhere. John stepped in then, his voice low. There's something else. The news stories, they're not going away. Some people are even trying to use them against me in my business, and I can handle that. But what I care about most is how it affects you. Tommy leaned forward. What do you mean, use against you? It means, John said, choosing his words carefully, there are people who think they can make me look weak by making you look bad. Danny frowned. That's not fair. No, John agreed. It's not. But that's why we have to decide together how we respond. And I want you to know something. Belinda and I are on the same side. Always. Later that day, Belinda suggested they do something unusual. Write letters, not to media, not to strangers, but to themselves. Write down, she told them, what you know to be true about who you are. Because someday when someone says something unkind, you can look at that letter and remember. At first, they were reluctant. But slowly, the sound of pencils scratching filled the room. Bobby wrote about how he could make people laugh without trying. Danny listed the names of the plants in the garden and how he knew which ones needed more sun. Tommy, after several false starts, wrote one line, I'm not broken. I'm learning. Belinda read the line and met his eyes. That's one of the bravest things I've ever seen someone write. But the real test of their newfound unity came sooner than expected. That afternoon, as they returned from the garden, a car was parked at the edge of the driveway. A man with a camera stepped out, his lens already raised. John's jaw tightened. Inside, he said, ushering the boys toward the door. But Belinda put a hand on his arm. They've been running from shadows for months, she said quietly. Maybe it's time they see that standing still is an option too. She knelt in front of the boys. You see that man? He doesn't get to tell your story. You do. If you want to walk inside, that's okay. But if you want to show him you're not afraid, we can wave and go back to what we were doing. For a moment, no one moved. Then Bobby lifted his hand in a small, shy wave. Danny followed, then Tommy, though it was more of a salute. The man lowered his camera for just a second, caught off guard. They turned and walked back toward the garden like it was any other day. That night at dinner, John raised his glass, not of wine but water, and said, to standing our ground. Bobby giggled. Danny grinned. Tommy nodded once, the corners of his mouth twitching upward. Belinda smiled, but her eyes lingered on each of them, as if she knew the battles ahead weren't over. But for the first time, they were ready to face them together. And John knew, whatever storms were coming, they'd face them as a family. The call came on a Thursday afternoon, just as Belinda was helping Bobby tie the last ribbon on a batch of gift baskets the boys had made for the neighbors. John stepped into the kitchen. Phone pressed his ear, his expression tight in that way Belinda had learned to read. Something big was coming. When he hung up, he looked at her and the boys, weighing his words. That was the Downtown Civic Foundation. He said, finally, they're hosting a charity gala this Saturday, fundraiser for children's literacy programs. They want us there. Danny's eyes widened. All of us? John nodded. They said it would be good for people to see the family together. Belinda heard what he wasn't saying. The gala wasn't just a fundraiser. It was a stage. A place where every camera in the room would be waiting to catch the smallest crack in the Whitakers' carefully rebuilt image. Tommy slouched in his chair. So, they want to look at us like we're in a zoo? Not exactly, Belinda said gently. They want to see how you've changed. And I think you're ready to show them. The next 2 days were a quiet preparation. Not rehearsed lines or forced manners, but small moments that would matter when the spotlight hit. Belinda walked them through things like making introductions, listening before speaking, and finding something kind to say even if you didn't like someone. She never used the word performance. Instead, she framed it as a challenge. You get to decide the story they walk away telling. Bobby, ever the imaginative one, made it into a game. Operation Prove Them Wrong, he declared, drawing a mission plan that included smiling, saying thank you, and avoiding anything that could be called throwing food. Tommy rolled his eyes, but Belinda noticed him checking the plan more than once. The night of the gala, the city's skyline glowed against a crisp autumn sky. The event was held in one of the grand ballrooms downtown, all glass walls and glittering chandeliers. John arrived with the boys and Belinda in tow, their entry drawing the kind of attention he both dreaded and expected. They looked like a picture from a magazine, John in a tailored navy suit, the triplets in matching charcoal blazers, and Belinda in a deep green dress that was elegant without being ostentatious. Whispers followed them as they made their way inside. Belinda heard snippets. That's them, the billionaire's kids, wonder if it's true. Tommy's shoulders stiffened, but Belinda brushed her hand lightly against his arm, a silent reminder. You're in control of your story. The first test came sooner than expected. While John was pulled aside by a board member, a woman in a diamond necklace approached Belinda and the boys. Her smile was tight, her eyes calculating. So, she said, looking the triplets over, you must be the famous Whitaker boys. I've heard quite a bit about you. Danny tilted his head. Good things, I hope? The woman chuckled, a sound with no warmth in it. Oh, you know how stories go. People say children can change, but it's rare. Belinda opened her mouth, but Tommy spoke first. We're still changing, he said, voice steady. And we're doing pretty good at it. The woman blinked, clearly not expecting that. Bobby smiled and offered her a gift basket from the table beside them. We made these for tonight. They're for people who care about kids learning to read. The shift in the woman's expression was almost imperceptible, but it was there, a crack in her certainty. Later, during the formal dinner, the boys sat through speeches and clinking glasses without a single outburst. Belinda watched them exchange small jokes, pass bread rolls without squabbling, and even thanked the servers by name. But the real moment came when the event's host called John to the stage for an impromptu interview. Mr. Whitaker, he said, you've been in the headlines this year for, let's call it, parenting under the microscope. What would you like people to know about your family tonight? John glanced toward the table where Belinda and the boys sat today. I'd like them to know that healing is possible, he said, that my sons are stronger than anyone has given them credit for, and that one person's belief, in this case Belinda's, can change the entire course of family. There was a beat of silence, and then he gestured toward the boys. And maybe they should speak for themselves. The room shifted as 3 small figures walked the stage. Tommy took the microphone first. People say a lot of things about us. Some of them used to be true. We were angry. We made life hard for everyone. But we weren't bad. We were just sad. And Belinda didn't run away when we made it hard to like us. Danny stepped up next. She showed us that being part of family means you don't give up on each other. Bobby held the microphone with both hands. And we're still learning. But we know how to try now. The applause started slow, then swelled into something that filled the room. It wasn't polite clapping. It was a sound of people seeing something they didn't expect. Afterward, as they were leaving, reporters approached with questions. For the first time, the boys didn't hide behind John or Belinda. They smiled, said, thank you, and kept walking. In the limo on the way home, Tommy leaned back against the seat. I think we passed a mission. Belinda looked at him in the reflection of the window. You did more than pass. You changed the story. John reached across and took her hand, not caring that all three boys were watching. We all did. Outside, the city lights blurred into streaks against the glass, and for the first time, the family felt like they weren't running from anything. They were moving forward together. The Monday after the gala, the Whitaker estate felt different. Not because anything dramatic had happened overnight, but because something had quietly shifted. The air seemed lighter, the morning routine less like a series of battles, and more like life. At breakfast, Bobby was chattering about the dessert table from the gala. I think I ate 7 tiny cheesecakes, but they were really tiny. Danny was asking Belinda if they could plant tulips in the garden, and Tommy, who had once been a self-appointed skeptic of everything, was telling John about a book he wanted to read. John didn't interrupt. He didn't correct. He just listened, letting the sound of their voices fill the space that had once been heavy with silence. Later that morning, as Belinda gathered the boys' school things, the doorbell rang. On the porch stood Mrs. Rodriguez, the Child Protective Services worker who had visited weeks earlier. She was holding an envelope. "I was in the neighborhood," she said with a smile, "and thought I'd drop this off in person." Inside was her final report. No evidence of neglect or abuse. Children appear emotionally supported and secure. Strong recommendation to maintain current caregiver relationship. John read the words twice, relief washing over him in waves. "Thank you," he said, his voice catching. Mrs. Rodriguez glanced toward the kitchen, where Belinda was helping Bobby tie his shoelaces. "Whatever you're doing here," she said softly, "keep doing it. It's rare to see a turnaround like this." That evening, Belinda found John in the garden, where the late autumn light painted everything in gold. The boys were inside working on a secret project. They refused to let either of them see. "They've come so far," she said, sitting beside him on the bench. "Not because they stopped missing Sarah, but because they learned it's okay to miss her and still live." John nodded, staring at the fountain where the water moved in slow, steady arcs. "You've given them that, Belinda. You've given me that." She smiled faintly. "You were always capable of it. You just needed someone to remind you." 2 days later, the secret project was revealed. The boys led John and Belinda into the living room, where a large poster board stood propped against the couch. Across the top, in uneven but determined handwriting, were the words, "Our Family Code." Underneath were 8 rules, written by the triplets themselves. 1. We don't give up on each other. 2. We say the truth, even when it's hard. 3. We remember Mama with happy thoughts, too. 4. We try before we say we can't. 5. We help people, even if they don't ask. 6. We don't let other people tell us who we are. 7. We forgive, but we don't forget the lesson. 8. We stick together, no matter what. Tommy looked up at Belinda. "Number 1's because of you." Danny added, "Number 6 too." And Bobby grinned. "Number 8's for all of us." Belinda felt the sting of tears, but didn't try to hide them. "I think these are the best rules I've ever seen." Life didn't magically become perfect after that. There were still arguments over who got the front seat in the car, homework forgotten on the kitchen counter, and the occasional spill that turned into a full-scale cleanup operation. But the difference was in how they handled it. When Tommy got frustrated, he took a breath instead of storming out. When Danny felt left out, he said so instead of sulking for hours. And when Bobby broke John's favorite coffee mug, he owned up to it and helped sweep the pieces. The family wasn't flawless, but they were resilient. Months passed, and winter turned to spring. One afternoon, as Belinda was walking the boys home from school, a car slowed beside them. A man leaned out the window. "Hey," he called. "You're the Whitaker kids, right? I saw you on TV. You're different than I thought." Tommy glanced at Belinda, who gave a tiny nod. "Yeah," Tommy said simply. "People change." And they kept walking. That summer, John surprised Belinda with a trip to Vermont to visit the boys' grandmother. It was the first time they'd been back since Sarah's funeral, and the air was thick with unspoken memories. But instead of letting the weight of the past pull them under, they carried it gently, like something precious but not fragile. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, the boys, John, and Belinda sat on the porch, fireflies flickering in the yard. Bobby rested his head on Belinda's shoulder. Do you think Mama knows we're okay now? Belinda's voice was soft but sure. I think she knew before you did. John reached for her hand. And she'd thank you, Belinda, for giving them back their childhood. Belinda shook her head. They gave it back to themselves. I just stayed long enough to see it happen. On the anniversary of Sarah's passing, the family visited her favorite garden in the city. They brought flowers, bright, joyful ones, not the somber kind, and sat together on the grass, telling stories. When they left, Bobby took Belinda's hand. I'm glad you didn't give up on us. She squeezed his hand. That was never an option. In the years that followed, the triplets grew into young men who carried their family code into everything they did. School friendships, even the way they treated strangers. They became known not for the chaos they once caused, but for the kindness they brought into rooms. John's business thrived, but more importantly, so did his home. And Belinda, once the latest nanny, was now simply Belinda Whitaker, wife, mother, and the steady center of family that had learned how to hold itself together. If you looked at them now, you might never guess where they'd started. But that was the thing about healing. It didn't erase the past. It built something strong enough to carry it. As Belinda tucked the boys, now teenagers, into bed one night, Tommy, the same boy who once swore he'd never like her, said quietly, "You know, you kind of ruined us." Belinda laughed. "Oh yeah? How's that?" "You made it impossible for us to believe people always leave." She leaned down and kissed his forehead. "Good. Then my job's done." Sometimes justice doesn't come in a courtroom or in a headline. Sometimes it's as simple and as profound as proving the world wrong about you. The Whitaker family did more than survive the storms. They learned to dance in the rain, together. Years later, people still remember the story of the Whitaker triplets, the one the news once called unmanageable. Only now it was told differently, not as a cautionary tale, but as proof that even the hardest hearts can learn to trust again when met with patience and love. Belinda sometimes thought back to that first chaotic morning in the Whitaker kitchen. The syrup on the floor, the toy truck at her feet, the walls the boys had built around themselves. She could still see the fear in their eyes, and the moment it began to fade, she knew now that the real miracle wasn't that she'd stayed. It was that they had let her in. And maybe that's what family really is. Not who you start with, but who still stands with you when the storms are over. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who believes in second chances. Tell me in the comments what's your family code. And if you haven't yet, subscribe so you'll never miss the next story that might just change the way you see the world.